If he loses, it's going to be because of underperformance with Latino voters, with black voters, and not drawing anything out of the coalition, and then simultaneously not adding all of the college-educated whites. Like we said, we're going to be talking about them a lot because they're the true kind of swing people within this with this election. And the more that you look, I'm beginning to look across the map. Again, it's pretty early. We don't have like widely available data, but little things are beginning to see that it's very possible in different states that things will be localized with different communities. So like in Ohio, these college-educated whites are definitely going to be much more important. So like right now, we're looking at the results. Biden is actually leading in Ohio with 36% of the vote. Now, look, it's only 36% of the vote, but a 56-42 in the beginning of the days, that's not really something that you would expect to see. And so if it's close there, this is a state which Trump won dramatically last time around. It is likely because of changes within that population. So the interesting part is that Trump might actually hang on down there in the Sun Belt, not because he did well with his traditional communities, because you have relative, modest, but enough gains amongst a diverse community. So Florida, one of the states becoming way more diverse than it was last time around, huge amounts more of Hispanic voters in their electorate, is probably going to deliver Trump a margin there higher than anybody has seen in over a decade. And that's just something that most of us are not equipped to talk about.
Well, and let's also think about where we're having massive COVID outbreaks right now, too, because I think that's an important story of this election as well. And if you look at the industrial Midwest, they are being hit. They are being hammered. Ohio, those results are coming in looking better than expected for Joe Biden. Doesn't mean he's going to win it, but looking better than expected for Joe Biden. Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, those states are getting hammered right now. Florida's not in great shape, but they're doing better right now than the industrial Midwest. I also think back to something that we noticed in the New York Times Siena polls, the last set that came out, that had some industrial Midwestern states and some Sunbelt states. And actually, Trump's economy rating was much higher among the Sunbelt voters than it was among the industrial Midwestern voters, which I think is, again, counter to the mainstream narrative of him being like all in on the forgotten man and the blue collar American. But the reality of how he's governed is he has governed for those like more affluent retirees or people checking their 401ks. That is who he ultimately has served.
Whose GDPs are increasing, right? Like if you think about it actually in terms of who's doing better and who's doing worse within the country, it's net migration to the Sun Belt because there's more space. Ever since air conditioning, that's basically like becoming a thing. Then the tech people are all coming in because the rent's too expensive in San Francisco. Many Californians, the most popular U-Haul route in the country is San Francisco to Austin, and then New Yorkers also moving down to Texas. Californians moving into Arizona. Like I said, the Atlanta suburbs, so you can have a very comfortable life there and still work for your Fortune 500 company. Those are really the places with net migration and who are very focused on some of the more like GOP tax cuts, right?
Yeah.
These are also places with college-educated whites. These are people who are a little bit more culturally liberal. So at the same time, it depends on how they view Trump, because last time around, regardless of how the media will paint him, the electorate saw Trump as much more moderate than any other Republican before him. And so the question is despite, basically 4 years of the media saying what they have been, do they still see him that way? This is, again, Georgia I'm so fascinated by. And I'm looking again at the Times Needle. I mean, they're now projecting an 85% chance that Trump is going to win the state of Georgia. I don't actually have county by county data in front. I don't know the state all that well, but it seems to me that there has been an under-deliverance here for Biden amongst the black community in particular, and not driving out those college-educated whites at the margins that he needed to. Now, again, Georgia is a much more diverse state than, say, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, right? So we could still see that happen. But this is also interesting. I can't wait till we get Arizona in to see if it's going to mirror that, because same dynamics at play in both.
All right. We've got the perfect person to talk about Florida right now. All right. Busy evening, obviously, ahead of us. Lots of results to unpack. Lots of amazing guests throughout the night. A number of states, as we've said already, have closed their polling sites, including the battleground states of New Hampshire, North Carolina, and, of course, Florida.
So here to discuss the results so far, contributor to the Florida Squeeze, and he's a voting behavior consultant, Dave Trotter. Dave, welcome back to the show by popular demand, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
Great to see you, Dave.
Hey, thanks to be back. Thank you.
Absolutely.
course.
Okay, Dave, so break down the state for us. Let's throw a map up there for you, and then you just start talking. Tell me where I should be looking, which counties, what jumps out at you, and who you think is going to win tonight.
Yeah, and I'm looking at mine right now, and it's the one you've been talking about, and I think it's the one we talked about before, is Miami-Dade County. So, I mean, overall, it's kind of interesting what's happening in Florida, because there are some positive trends for the Democrats right now, but Miami-Dade, that margin's a little bit lower than it should be. Broward County, that number should be around 70%. It's at 65%. Same thing with Palm Beach. That should be around 60%. It's at 56%. So what's interesting is you're seeing where Democrats do really well in the past, those margins are going down. But you're actually seeing Democrats do quite well in picking up a percentage here or there in other more Republican counties, Lake, Brevard, Polk, places like this. So, you know, but it's not enough to offset the loss in Miami-Dade. That was a huge one today.
Got it.
Yeah, and Dave, what does that tell you about which demographic groups may be looking good for Biden tonight, maybe looking good for Trump tonight? What are some of the dynamics that may be unique to Florida? What do you see within those trends?
I mean, I think right now, until we get into the precinct level data, it's kind of hard to figure out exactly where they went. I mean, I've been sounding the alarm about Miami-Dade more in regards to the lack of Democratic voter turnout than necessarily the Hispanic vote. But at the end, we might see that's the case. But if we were looking at early vote wait times in Miami-Dade, and I might have mentioned this before, Hialeah had high wait times, but places where the Black community was stronger, it didn't. And this is another thing about Florida that I think a lot of people forget is in a lot of states, people treat the Black vote as monolithic, but you have a strong Caribbean population in Northwest and other parts, Northeast and the eastern parts of Miami-Dade County, and they're a different electorate, but sometimes they're treated as the same, and that might have had an impact here.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right there, Dave. So just break it down in terms of the panhandle vote, because that was another area we have to look very closely. And the reason I also want you to pay attention there is that might tell me a little bit about what's going on in the state of Georgia. What can you tell us about the panhandle?
Well, I mean, if there are any type of Georgia counties, any counties that would be similar to Georgia, it would probably be Hamilton County, Columbia County, places like this that are very close to Valdosta. Now, I don't know if this is necessarily if there's any type of relationship, but again, in Jefferson County, we're seeing it very close there. We're seeing it close and a little bit closer in Madison, but sometimes these trend Democratic. So overall, the margins are a little bit further down there. And that might have an impact on what happens in Georgia, because there are some things that are in certain TV markets. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Dave, what's your experience been of the campaign's approach on the ground? One thing that's been theorized is because the Biden campaign basically opted out of their traditional door knocking and canvassing approach that Democrats traditionally engage in the state of Florida, that may have been part of what really hurt them ultimately in places like Miami-Dade.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly where it hurt him, too, because, and this is another thing about an internal problem, I think, within Democratic Party politics, is that there is just not that organization. They think about the elections a few months out every 2 years, and they don't have the long-term organization. So for the Democrats, and this has been an issue in Florida for probably about 2 decades now, they just don't have that constant trying to identify voters, getting connections within the communities, but especially Miami-Dade, the Republicans have done quite well with that, and I think we're seeing the results of it tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's fascinating there. Talk to us about Broward County as you were previously. And here's the other thing I'm interested in, Dave. What about the senior vote? We made a lot of some of the early Quinnipiac poll. I remember I was shocked in like April. I saw like a Quinnipiac poll and I saw Trump losing these boomer voters by like a double-digit margin. And I was like, oh man, I mean, this is the state of Florida. This matters a lot. How has that been turning out tonight based on your expectation? I know we don't have the full data on that, but what are you seeing in it?
Well, I think it's kind of, we don't have the full data, so it's maybe a little bit hard to tell. But I think one place to look that's kind of interesting is Collier County. So one thing that I noticed in the early trends when when vote by mail started in Collier County, I noticed that while a ton of Democratic votes were coming in, for some reason in Collier County, a ton of Republican votes came in. And today, Collier County's vote by mail was pretty close, only a few thousand vote margin. So this might be an indication of that. And again, I think the seniors are different depending on where you're at. A senior in Sumter County, for example, that lives in the villages is going to be quite different than a senior in Broward County. But again, I think with Broward County, you have to look more at, it's more of a diverse vote. I don't think it's necessarily connected to seniors. Maybe Palm Beach is a little bit more. And as of right now, Palm Beach is underperforming. So yeah, I think that it's too early to tell, but it's kind of a mixed bag depending on where you look.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about that, Dave. For Democrats who are looking for positive signs out of Florida that may translate well into other states, what are some of the places that he is outperforming the Hillary performance last time around? I was looking at Pinellas County in particular, just kind of like the classic bellwether, and he seems to be doing better right now in Pinellas than Hillary was doing last time around. What are some of those other bright spots within Florida, as it looks very much like Donald Trump is likely to take that state?
So, I mean, yeah, Pinellas County is definitely one of the ones. Also, you have Duval County. So now this is why I say the black vote isn't monolithic, because a lot of the reason why Duval County is turning to the Democratic side is this is probably the only place in Florida where the Democrats actually mobilize their voters. So I think the black vote is turning out quite well in Duval County. So, does that spill into what we see in parts of Georgia? Possibly. So I think that would be the case. Also in places like Gadsden County, which is highly African American, and that borders Georgia as well. We're seeing those trends too. As far as overall, I think in and around Central Florida, it's kind of a mixed bag again, because we're seeing it in the early vote and the vote by mail. We see that the Democrats outperformed the Republicans, at least compared to the model that I had. But now as the election day votes start coming in, it's kind of decimating that. So we are kind of seeing this election day dynamic, which is why we're seeing the numbers we are in Florida right now.
Yeah. Dave, invaluable insights.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for breaking the numbers down. We're so grateful for you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave.
Great, thank you.
There's another call, this one on the Senate side. That's not going to be any surprise to anyone who's actually been paying attention or watches Rising even for 5 minutes, which is that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell won re-election easily, handily, early over Chuck Schumer's candidate of choice, Amy McGrath. Big shocker there. One of the
She got blown out.
She got blown out. And this is what's sad here from a resistance liberal perspective is Amy McGrath raised millions and millions and millions of dollars, barely got through a primary in spite of a 200-to-1 cash advantage over Charles Booker, who was more of a sort of Bernie populist progressive in the state of Kentucky. And, she was lauded by many typical sort of resistance heroes who raised money for her. And this was just like setting your cash on fire ultimately, because she never had a real chance to pull this thing off. She tried to run this is also a lesson. People don't do this. She tried to run as a more pro-Trump than Mitch McConnell.
Yep.
Voters are not going to back you if they think that you're full of it. And that's ultimately what it was. They're like, you don't know what you stand for. We don't believe you that you're going to be more pro-Trump, and no thank you, we'll stick with this guy. Even though Mitch McConnell consistently has the lowest approval ratings of any senator among his own constituents. But Democrats decided to go with, and this came from the top, from Chuck Schumer, this was his hand-picked candidate, with someone who really couldn't make this thing competitive.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of incredible to look at and to see. I mean, they spent, almost like $100 million.
I can't
from
even
the
look it
beginning,
up.
from her primary on to now. And they just set it on fire. I mean, she just completely lost. Congratulations to Chuck Schumer, I guess. I hope that she kind of raised some money for some other candidates there. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty embarrassing. From what we can see from that perspective.
We have another guest lineup, but before we go to that, one of the early dynamics that may be shaping up is something we just talked about. The Ohio results that are in so far it's early. There's what percent? Actually, there's about 56% of the vote in there at this point. But Joe Biden is maintaining a significant lead. Again, that doesn't mean that he's going to win Ohio, because that depends a lot on when the votes came in and where they came in. But the analysis that I'm seeing is that it does look like Ohio is going to be very close.
Right.
This is a state that Donald Trump won by 9 points last time. So this was one that really should have even been close for Democrats. It's also a state that has a large number of what is seen as Donald Trump's core demographic,
right.
White working class voters. But as we were saying, not only have they been hit hard by COVID, not only do they have actually a Republican governor who has broken with Donald Trump on his handling of coronavirus, that would be Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio. This is also a state that witnessed a big promise from Donald Trump on the economic side that came apart. So he went to Youngstown, he said, don't sell your homes, said that the GM was going to keep their jobs at the Lordstown plant closed. And so I think all those factors together, one of the interesting dynamics here may be that Donald Trump has seen more erosion in the area that was supposed to be his real strength, the industrial Midwest, than in this new burgeoning area, the Sun Belt, that was supposed to be so great and moving so dramatically towards Democrats.
That's the real question here, is that it's very possible that the Sun Belt states could be off and could actually go more towards Trump. He could overperform there, and he could underperform in the industrial Midwest. It would actually be a total counter, but in a way, it would make a lot of sense because if you are a increase the GDP candidate, minimum wage, like all this stuff, not particularly popular, in these big states, which are growing. They have a lot of economic growth. They have a lot of economic engine that generally leads you to having a more economic libertarian framework. Whereas if you're coming from the industrial Midwest, you want more industrial policy. You want to talk about going back. You want to talk about rebuilding America. So this is a message which could be fundamentally contradictory. And it could be that Trump, by kind of changing his governance style, talking a lot about socialism sucks, all of that, could have appealed to these core voters in the growing Sun Belt of the country and could simultaneously lose the industrial Midwest, which, I mean, I'm not even really prepared to understand that. It's kind of like a galaxy brain thing.
But intuitively,
as we sit here, it's beginning to make sense as we see it.
It's how he's governed.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes, so far, it's early, like all the million caveats. So far, what we're seeing makes a hell of a lot of sense. Joe Biden ran a campaign aimed directly at seniors, aimed directly at affluent white suburbanites, and that is who's turning up for him. Even within the numbers, like I know the state of Kentucky relatively well, so I was drilling into the numbers there, doing way better than Hillary Clinton in Kentucky. In northern Kentucky, there's these Cincinnati suburbs, doing way better than Hillary Clinton there, doing way better than Hillary Clinton did in the other suburbs in Kentucky. You see the same dynamic. Dave was pointing out some of the suburban counties that are more white in Florida. Joe Biden actually outperformed what Hillary did last time around. But, they haven't really been doing the work or trying to appeal with the bread and butter economic message to this rising diverse electorate in places like Florida and Arizona and Texas. He's been underperforming with Latinos the entire time. So his message, which was squarely aimed at white suburbanites, the return to normal, resistance liberal type messaging, is landing squarely with the target demographic. And Trump's message, what has he been running on, actually? It's the socialism sucks message. And then when we would ask the Trump campaign here, like, okay, what is he actually going to do in the second term?
Cut taxes.
Taxes and deregulation.
Yes, and possibly cut Social Security, too. Although he turned on that near the end.
And that's landing exactly with the demographic that you would frankly expect.
I have got some numbers here which are astonishing. These are from CNN, and again, grains of salt, early exits, blah, blah, blah. This is wild, okay? Hispanic voters for 2016, Clinton was plus 27 with Hispanic voters in the state of Florida. This time around, Biden plus 8. In Georgia, Clinton plus 40. 2020, Biden plus 25. Ohio, Clinton plus 41. 2020, Biden plus 24. Full-blown realignment that's happening and by the way, those are three very different states. You got Florida, Georgia, and Ohio, okay?
Wow.
Not exactly the same populations. Obviously, the swing is the most dramatic percentage-wise in the state of Florida. That's not surprising. But we expected here to see about an 8 to 11-point swing amongst Hispanic voters nationally, as we saw, and especially driven by Hispanic men, which, when this is all said and done, I am not going to be surprised if he ends up winning 50% of Hispanic men in this country, which is just something, once again, most people are not prepared to understand unless they see what people are actually actually voting on in this election. And that is almost certainly what we can see right now.
Not like your imaginary, picture of, we'll just put Kamala on the ticket and that'll solve the problem.
We had Chuck Rocha on this show how many times saying you got to talk to Latinos, you got to meet them where they are. The Trump campaign message is working. Joe Biden is underperforming, and they got arrogant. And you know what? It's cost them in the state of Florida. It certainly did. We don't know what the final results there are, but like I said, very optimistic right now. If I'm the Trump campaign in the state of Florida, I expect that call to begin coming in soon.
I would expect that call to be coming in anytime as well. And I think arrogant is exactly the right word.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, you've got this other campaign, the Sanders campaign, that did phenomenally well with Latinos, dominated in every single state. They even won. Remember at the end of the primary when they dredged up Bernie's old comments about Castro, and they're like, this is going to kill him in Florida, kill him with the Cuban community. And then Bernie actually, on his way to losing Florida, won the Cuban community in the Democratic primary. Did the Biden campaign reach out to anyone on the Sanders campaign to say, hey, what'd you do? What worked? What messages landed? No. I mean, that didn't happen whatsoever. They've clearly been more focused on building this suburban white coalition. And look, I think, based on what we're seeing so far, Biden is still well positioned to ultimately win the Electoral College. Donald Trump would have to not only win Florida and North Carolina and Georgia. He'd also have to go and pick up Pennsylvania, and trends are early, but I think the signs are there that Biden's going to be able to pull off what he needs to. But it's no surprise that the coalition looks like what it looks like, because that's who they were aiming for, and that's who ultimately the return to normal message landed with. All right, we got another guest for you. Let's take a look at more broadly some of the trends out there.
So with us tonight, our friend and our colleague, Hill reporter Julia Manchester. Right now, she's live blogging all the races state by state. Julia, it's good to see you. How are you?
Great to see you, Julia.
I'm hanging in there.
All right. Well, we miss having you in the studio, Julia. I believe you are a native Floridian, right? So first, kick us off by that. Tell us what you're looking at state by state. Some of the interesting results out there. What are you thinking?
Well, Saagar, in Florida, I don't think what we're seeing is really a surprise. Look, we see that Biden has struggled with the Latino community, and we've seen that President Trump has just done better messaging in parts of that Latino community, particularly in South Florida. If you look at the Latino community in Florida and really anywhere, it's not a monolith. It doesn't vote the same way. So, for example, in South Florida, you have a large Cuban population, a large Venezuelan population, Nicaraguan population. You saw the Trump campaign putting this message out there, basically painting Democrats as socialists. And I'm not saying that's why a lot of these South Florida Latino voters are leaning towards Trump right now, but it definitely has had some sort of an effect in drawing them to Trump. So you're seeing in Dade County in particular, it's been going back and forth. I'm not sure where it is at the moment, but it seems like one moment Biden is leading, but now it seems like Trump is really, growing his lead in that county right now. If you go further up north in the state to Orlando, the Orange County area, Central Florida, expanded to the I-4 corridor. We know that historically, especially Central Florida, this is a Democratic-leaning area. However, Biden is outperforming Hillary Clinton in this area, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, we see a large number of suburban voters in Orange County, in Seminole County, parts of Volusia County, for example. Those are voters that will definitely lean towards Biden, and we've seen that the Biden campaign has very much targeted them. You also have a large Puerto Rican population in Osceola County, which isn't far from Orlando. That population is definitely going to lean more liberal than their Cuban counterparts, for example. So that's going for Biden there. Head down further south on the I-4 corridor, you have Hillsborough County, Pinellas County, the greater Tampa Bay area. That's going for Biden as well the last time I looked at the results. Then again, it's a lot of suburban voters there. So like you were saying before, Krystal, the Biden campaign has really targeted a lot of white suburban voters. So that's working for him in Central Florida. But the question is, will it be enough to make up for the gain, for what he's lost in South Florida?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it looks unlikely, frankly, in terms of Florida. I don't think you can overcome the erosion that he saw in some areas that, were really strong for like Miami-Dade, South Florida, should have been overwhelming for Biden, and then you kind of hold on other places and cut into the margin. It doesn't look like he's been able to pull that off. What other states are you looking at right now, Julia? And how is the sort of Biden theory of the case of turning out these affluent white suburban voters, how is that holding up in other parts of the country?
Well, if you look at Arizona, for example, there is a large suburban population in that area, in Maricopa County, for example, in the Phoenix area. And we've heard that Jen O'Malley-Dillon, the campaign manager of the Biden campaign, says she believes that if they get their high propensity voters, enough of them to turn out in just Maricopa County, they can potentially win the state or be on track to winning the state. It's a largely mail-in elections. So we might see those mail-in results coming in from Arizona a bit later, so it might take a little bit for that gap to narrow. But Arizona is interesting because, like I said, a lot of suburban voters, but also a lot of senior citizen voters, similar to Florida. So we've seen that Biden has maybe done better with the senior citizen vote in Florida, for example. However, the senior citizen vote in Arizona is different in that the senior citizen vote in Florida, a lot of seniors come from the Northeast, which definitely leans more liberal. But in Arizona, they come from the Midwest, which is, tends to be a bit more conservative. So the Biden campaign has had some trouble making inroads in that state with those voters. Now, I haven't seen any returns from Arizona yet or any exit polling, but that's definitely something we'll be watching. Another state where the last time I looked, it looked pretty razor thin, was North Carolina. A lot of suburban voters there. I think Biden also trying to turn out the Black community in that state as well. So we know that Biden, in Super Tuesday really was able to rev up that African-American Democratic electorate. So it'll be interesting to see how they turn out for him on election night, and if it is enough to put him over the top in states like North Carolina or even Georgia, which hasn't gone blue or for a Democratic president, I think, since 1976 when Jimmy Carter won it.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Georgia as well, Julia. I mean, what are some of the dynamics that are at play there? And then, this is my real question. I think it's going to be the ultimate question of the night. Are Sun Belt trends ones that are going to replicate themselves in the upper Midwest? And I know you can't answer that question, but what do you think?
It's really interesting. Georgia, like some of the other states I mentioned, also has a large suburban population, particularly in Atlanta. That's why Democrats, John Ossoff, was targeting that suburban congressional district, for example, that he ran in before. There's a lot of suburban support for Democrats, so they're really honing in on that. They're also honing in on getting African Americans to turn out more in the state and even Hispanic voters to turn out in the state. So the question is, if turnout in Georgia really is enough, is large enough, I think that will definitely benefit Biden. And I think in a lot of these suburban communities, there's just such a dissatisfaction with the Trump campaign and the Trump administration right now that's obviously working in Biden's favor, but it really all depends on turnout.
Yeah.
Certainly
all right.
does.
We're going to keep watching. Julia, thank you so
Julia.
much.
Thank you.
There are a number, obviously, of different pathways to victory for President Trump versus Vice President Joe Biden.
Yeah, and so joining us now to examine that he looks at the results in real time is our colleague, it's Hill reporter Jonathan Easley. Easley, good to see you, man. Thanks for taking time out of your night.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Jonathan, just tell us a little bit about what you've been looking at, some of the trends for tonight. What surprised you, what hasn't, and what more?
Well, the thing that's got everyone surprised right now is the results coming out of South Florida and how Biden is underperforming there. And it almost looks like Florida might be getting close to out of reach for him right now. I mean, look, when we entered this night, Biden had quite a few pathways to victory. But, you start taking one state away here, one state away there, and it gets very close very fast. I mean, the states that I'm watching right now are, obviously, we got Florida. We've got results coming in North Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, and Texas. I mean, if Biden were to win any one of those states, the race is effectively over. So there's quite a few landmines here for President Trump. But if you take Florida away, it's traditionally red states like Texas and Georgia seem like a heavy lift for Biden. It's really, you start looking at the Midwest then, and Biden has a big polling lead in Michigan, big polling lead in Wisconsin. Pennsylvania has long been seen as the tipping point state. We might be headed in that direction right now. If that's the case, we're probably not going to get results from Pennsylvania until Friday. at the earliest. I mean, they're still going to be counting ballots that are postmarked on November 3rd until Friday in Pennsylvania. So it seems like election officials there are circling that day to have the vote finalized. I mean, Biden could still put this thing away early tonight with a surprise victory in Ohio, in Georgia, or North Carolina. But with the way that Florida is heading, it raises questions about Biden's strength elsewhere.
Yeah,
Yes.
Indeed it does. Out of the states that you just mentioned, maybe North Carolina is the one where Biden has the best shot to pull off kind of, an early night victory. And as you point out, look, what Donald Trump has to do is he has to win all of those states that you just mentioned, plus he's got to pick up Pennsylvania. So let's start by taking a look at North Carolina. The New York Times needle did have it tilting towards Biden. Now I think they have it tilting towards Trump.
They do.
But what are you seeing? What are you seeing in the results in North Carolina that are significant and perhaps indicative?
I actually haven't looked closely enough at North Carolina results to.
There's a lot of states out there.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, the New York Times at this point they circled the three states that they circled tonight. It was Georgia was one, North Carolina was one, and Florida was one. And their needles right now are all pointing toward Trump in those states.
Yes.
And again, those are must-win states for Trump. Biden can get by and win the White House without winning any of those three. But we definitely came into this night with sort of the sense that knowing that there was a very fine line between a potential Biden landslide and a narrow Trump victory in the Electoral College, and that Biden could have closed this thing out early with a victory in Florida, North Carolina, or Georgia. And right now, just looking at just the early results that are coming in, the needle's pointing toward Trump in those three states, which is going to up the pressure on Biden in those Midwest states.
Yeah, I mean, right before we joined us, this is the eternal question that we're now starting to grapple with, which is that are the trends that we see in Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, which, let's be clear, all pollsters basically had those going towards Biden, so clearly something went wrong, which is that are those going to be replicable in the upper Midwest? So my thinking is that if he underperforms with the college-educated whites in Florida and in North Carolina and in Georgia, this is Biden, does that mean he might do so in the upper Midwest? I mean, Ohio right now is a little bit closer than a lot of people thought. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is just kind of spitballing here. I would have to say that I don't think that the results that we're seeing in Florida are necessarily replicable across the Midwest necessarily. Now, maybe they are. I mean, but we do look at the early results coming out of Ohio, and Biden does seem to be outperforming in some of these, at least in some of these early vote totals. Now, this is all sort of a mess because we don't know exactly what these states are necessarily returning first. Are they returning the early absentee or early in-person votes first, or the votes that were cast today first? So these things could swing pretty wildly. Looking at some of the early results coming out of Texas, I mean, Biden is just mopping up in some of these suburban counties, which is a good sign for him. I still think it's a heavy lift for him to try to win Texas outright. But definitely with some of the early results coming out of Ohio, it does sort of confirm what we've seen in the Midwest and Rust Belt polling about Biden's strength. Now, will that hold up? I don't know, but it doesn't. It looks like he is running stronger right now in a state like Ohio than we maybe expected, as opposed to where he's running right now in a state like Florida. So it doesn't seem like necessarily there's going to be this 1-to-1 carryover from the South to the Midwest necessarily, which is good news for Biden considering the results that we're getting right now out of Florida.
Yeah, I mean, that would really be something if what saved Biden is basically white voters in the industrial Midwest. I mean, those are supposed to be like Trump's people.
Yep.
That was supposed to be his real strength in this presidency. That's, of course, where he shocked the world back in 2016, winning Michigan, winning Wisconsin, winning Pennsylvania. And it's very early, but indications are they could go in a little bit of a different direction than what is supposed to be this rising Democratic electorate in the Sun Belt states. What are we seeing so far out of the state of Pennsylvania in terms of enthusiasm and indications? And also, What makes all of us a little bit nervous, no matter who you want to ultimately win this election, is Pennsylvania, as you point out, is one of these states that's had challenges, court challenges to their voting procedures. They've also had this whole naked ballot, mail-in ballot situation. So what are some of the complications that could unfold if this does, in fact, come down to the state of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, well, let me just go back real quick, Krystal, to your point about coalitions, too, and maybe Biden outperforming with some of the white working class voters in the Midwest. I mean, how shocking will it be if Trump pulls out unexpected victories in some of these states based on his support from people of color, from Latinos or black voters, and eating into some of those margins? I mean, it's just we're dealing with sort of with really major shifts in coalitions and a realignment in some of these states it's really pretty shocking. Getting back to Pennsylvania, I mean, we're not going to know the results out of Pennsylvania tonight. And I mean, like, the bottom line is that's the tipping point state. I mean, Biden could put this away early with a win in Ohio or something like that. But if most of the 2016 map stays the same, it's going to come down to Pennsylvania. And I might have said this earlier, but, you know, they're still going to be counting ballots all the way through Friday. They're actually going to be counting their in-person election day votes first. So I think they were able to start opening and processing some of the absentee ballots today, but I don't think they could start counting those officially until the polls close. So they're going to go through their in-person election day votes first, which could lean toward President Trump. That's the trend that we've been seeing across the rest of the country. And then they're going to start going through those absentee mail ballots, and they'll still be accepting those ballots that are postmarked November 3rd through Friday. So that's probably going to be if polls are, I mean, the polls showed Biden with a lead there, so maybe we'll know earlier whether he's going to win or not. But if it's, no one's really getting that landslide vibe at this hour right now. So if it is a close race, it could be Friday at the earliest, and that's going to be just a torturous few days, and there's going to be court challenges. There's media reports about every snafu that happened at every polling place or every counting center is going to be a national headline. So it's going to be a tense few days focused on Pennsylvania if most of the 2016 map holds through the rest of the night.
Certainly right.
All right.
Thanks for joining us,
Jonathan. Thank you for sketching out the nightmare scenario. Appreciate it, my friend.
Guys.
Coming up shortly, we're going to have managing editor of Sabatos Crystal Ball, Kyle Kondik. He's going to join us at Top Line, what we're seeing so far. But first, according to Gallup, 69% of voters are enthusiastic about this election. That is up 50% from back in 2016. But 77% of voters say that the stakes are higher than ever. Here is a look at how voters are feeling right now about the 2020 race. You want to go? And then if I have to. Why don't we vamp and then I can do the Kyle interview and then you can go.
Show up and vote. You will determine the outcome of this election. Vote, vote, vote.
People that love the job we're doing, we have more enthusiasm than maybe anybody.
We choose unity over division, science over fiction, and yes, we choose truth over lies.
On election day, you can send a message that the fake news media can't get away with it any longer. We can't let them get away with it any longer.
So much is at stake for this nation. The very soul of the nation is at stake.
We're going to win. I wouldn't have said that 3 weeks ago.
Apparently we're on a hot mic.
Yeah.
Didn't say anything too bad.
Jonathan easily just sketched out what is like the scenario that has been keeping me up at night, which is this thing coming down to the state of Pennsylvania, which could very well be where we're heading right now. Look, here's what we know so far. Florida basically gone for Democrats. Georgia, not looking great. North Carolina, maybe a little bit better of a shot there, but not looking great for Democrats either. And let's be clear. Like, Donald Trump needed to win all three of those, had to win them. Whereas if Biden picked off one, it'd be basically game over. it's early. He still could. I think North Carolina is probably his best shot at this point, but it certainly looks like those could all three go to Donald Trump at this point. If you're not picking up Florida or Georgia or North Carolina, you're probably not picking up Texas. And remains to be seen, we don't have any Arizona results yet. So that is one that is still very much a question mark. But it definitely looks like we could be heading down to Pennsylvania being the deciding point, and that makes me very, very nervous because this is one of those states that cannot count the ballots, couldn't start counting ballots until today. There's questions about, the Trump campaign has raised questions about the ability for people to continue to have the ballots counted between November 3rd and November 6th that arrive postmarked by election date. So these aren't like, they decided to vote after the fact. They postmarked them. They only just arrived November 3rd through the 6th. There's issues with the naked ballot situation, and we could be headed towards that very incredibly stressful and fraught situation
And in case anyone didn't hear me while I was talking about the hot mic, there's a hilarious story that Fulton County elections results are going to be delayed after a pipe has burst in the room with the ballots. And so
it's a very 2020 thing to happen.
The population of Fulton County is 1 million and houses the city of Atlanta. So actually,
no big deal.
Maybe that's why the Georgia results might be skewed. I haven't heard anybody say that, but I mean, there you go. Maybe that's why we are seeing the state tilt towards so much to Trump, is that the largest county apparently has to delay their voting. I think that's absolutely hilarious. But broadly, I think we've already learned a couple of elections, and we told a couple of very interesting lessons. And we told you all around 9 o'clock, we're actually going to know quite a bit. What do we know right now? Probably not the 10-point huge landslide win
not a
for Joe
landslide.
Biden. If there was a 10-point popular vote margin victory, then Biden would have won in Florida. He'd likely be winning in North Carolina and in Georgia, and all of that would be clear within the data. So here's the real question. Is it in that 3-point range? Because if it's 3 for Biden, Trump is going to win. I really think that, because that means he's going to win in the state of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, or even elsewhere that he might need to, just even Pennsylvania, because he was able to keep it close and that electoral college victory. But then if we start to get into the 4s and 5s, that's where things get really interesting. Because if Biden is only winning by about 4% of the electoral vote, you could still have a scenario. This is like the 279 Trump scenario, where he wins the state of Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, hangs on to Pennsylvania, but he's got to win Arizona too. So all eyes on both of those states. But here's the thing. It's not necessarily going that way. As far as I can tell, this is general discourse that I'm seeing on Twitter amongst the other election analysts, but also within the data of Ohio, the state of Ohio itself, which actually has a decent amount of the percent of their vote reporting, 62% according to Decision Desk. Things are actually looking pretty good for Joe Biden. He's up at 54% of the vote to Trump's 44%. I don't think it's going to handle that way. We still got to get the rurals in and everything else. But if we could tell you in the next hour or so that things go for Ohio, for Biden, game over, done. It literally is done for Trump.
Yes, agreed. There are 2 big things that are giving Biden team comfort right now. Well, we'll give them 3 things that are giving the Biden team comfort right now. They are outperforming in the suburbs. Even in Florida, where the result overall is much worse than they expected, or looks to be worse than they expected, even in Florida, they're outperforming the suburbs. In North Carolina, it is very, very tight. Republicans are still nervous about that state, and Democrats are outperforming in the suburbs.
Right.
So the suburbs seem to be coming in for them kind of the way that they expected. On specific state level, Pennsylvania doesn't have a lot of returns in, but what they have in so far, very favorable for Democrats. Democrats like their turnout numbers there that they're seeing so far. What they were able to bank in the early vote, that's giving them some comfort. There were some reports, Peter Alexander had some reports from the Trump campaign that they were not feeling that good about their Pennsylvania turnout operation. This in spite of the fact that the president was there, a lot in the home stretch of the campaign and clearly focusing a lot of energy there. So that's giving them some comfort. So you've got the suburban areas giving them some comfort. Pennsylvania, early returns giving them some comfort. And then maybe the biggest thing, though, is Ohio. Because this is a dramatic, even with what we know so far, you've got about 50% to 60% in the state of Ohio. So it's a significant chunk. And even if Trump does end up pulling off the victory there, this shows that the industrial Midwest is not following the same trends and patterns as the Sun Belt appears to be following, where that seems to have been a polling miss, where they understated President Trump's support. And why? Because they really missed how much he'd gained among Latinos.
Yes.
And it also appears they may have overstated or over-expected what the turnout would be among those diverse groups ultimately on election day for Joe Biden. So, I mean, just wrap your head around that. It's totally contrary to what the mainstream media would have you believe, because when we've been covering, how long have we been covering the Latino vote and how it's been moving from the Democratic primary into, we said from the beginning that this was a real risk for Joe Biden because he doesn't have the relationship there. Then we said, my God, they're not even asking the Bernie people what to do. They're not doing the work. We had Chuck on here. We had Colin O'Hara. This is something we've been really focused on. But a lot of the discourse in mainstream media was like, well, I don't know, these Latino samples are kind of small. Like, I just don't really believe it. I mean, that was basically, it was like, I don't really buy it. I don't think this is actually a real thing. And not only was it a real thing, it appears that those polls, which should have been warning signs with this very diverse community, and again, we should say, like, the way that things break in Florida may be very different from how they break in other places, although so far what we've seen is actually consistent erosion for Joe Biden among Latinos, no matter where they are in the country or what, country of origin they are affiliated with. But those warning signs were in a way understated and undersold the problem for him, both in terms of erosion and in terms of turnout.
No, I think you're right. Here's some interesting analysis now from 538 that they just put out, which is that Florida goes to Trump, which looks extraordinarily likely. Then his electoral college chances go up to 33%, according to their model. In other words, the exact margin
2016.
of 2016. And then if he wins Georgia, as it's beginning to look like, his chances could go up to 38%. And if he won North Carolina, the race would be in a toss-up.
Wow.
And might I just direct you over to that New York Times needle of a 95% chance of Trump winning the state of Florida, 82% chance for Georgia, 79% for Trump in the state of North Carolina. So maybe we're looking at a toss-up, Krystal.
Oh my God.
Not exactly what we necessarily expected. Georgia, I'm actually really shocked by. I really do wonder if that Fulton County result that we were talking about earlier might be skewing the results here somewhere, or if they're able to count for that another way. Because if that suburban vote doesn't come in for Biden at the margins that they kept bragging to us about, they centered their whole campaign on this. They were like, no, this is it. The ascendant majority, the college-educated whites that were coming in. And these are the people, who donated so much money to Joe Biden, who I really expected to come out in absolute full force. And if they are not coming out, and if Trump is getting basically saved here by diverse community, like the black community, the Latino community in the state of Florida and in Georgia, then it's really going to be something. But again, I don't want to overstate that case. A toss-up is still a toss-up at 50-50. And the real question is Ohio. I want to see more of these numbers that are coming out of any industrial Midwestern state. Right now, if you look at the map, we haven't called any states within even that vicinity except for Indiana and for Illinois, which just simply aren't the same in terms of their demographic profile there.
Yeah, no, not whatsoever. One indication, God only knows what's going on with the counting in Fulton County, let me be clear. The early in-person tallies from Fulton County look very good for Joe Biden. He's doing, according to the New York Times, 10 points better than Hillary Clinton got 68% of the vote there, and Joe Biden is doing about 10 points better than that. So that would indicate that, the suburban vote is coming in kind of the way that they expect. But again, it may be that underperformance with minority voters, with young voters, with Latino voters, as we've been talking about, that ultimately is the issue here. It's really remarkable to see how this is all coming down, though, and how it's actually, in a way, it's weirdly gratifying to see. It is to see that, if you take a voter for granted, they may not show up for you. If you don't bother to talk about things like healthcare and wages and issues that they've told pollsters over and over again are important, they may not come out for you. You can't just take people for granted. You can't just run on like, I'm going to wear a mask and not tweet mean things and expect that that's going to be sufficient to overwhelmingly win what is an incredibly winnable election. And what have we said from the beginning? Democrats took a huge risk by throwing all in with Joe Biden. And then Joe Biden's campaign took a huge risk by basically saying, screw you, to a large portion of the Democratic base, a large portion that was very enthusiastic and that is very issue focused on climate change, on racial justice, on economic inequality. And they basically offered them nothing and said, suck it up and vote for us. And look, they're going to win, you know, those groups, but it's not with the margins that they need for this to be the clear landslide victory that they were obviously hoping for.
And that's what, see, that is the key, which is that their bet on a landslide. And that's, look, let's be honest here. As much as they were playing the expectations game, that's what a lot of them expected. They expected, and many in the media, a 10% win. And that's just not going to happen tonight. I mean, look, we're not saying Biden can't win, but if he does, it is not going to be by the margins that they expected. While we were talking, we just got a slew of new calls with a bunch of states where polls just closed. It's now 9 p.m. here on the East Coast. So the Associated Press called the state of North Dakota, surprise, surprise there for Trump, South Dakota for Trump, Nebraska for Trump, Wyoming for Trump, the state of New Mexico for Joe Biden, and we already have the calls that we have right there. So
we should say
the current Electoral College, where it currently stands, 119 for Joe Biden, 92 for Donald Trump.
No, we should say the Trump campaign kind of tried to play footsie with New Mexico with us. Remember that?
Oh, I remember that.
They were like, well, they did a rally there, right?
They're Kayleigh McEnany sitting right over, I'm all turned around because I think she was sitting right over there and was telling us about how Latinos in Arizona had driven to New Mexico, and they could tell from their data that based on the trade war and the president's trade war and all of that, that they were going to make a big play for New Mexico. Then this thing called the pandemic hit, and I think that largely went away.
Right.
But yeah, basically,
New Mexico,
they called New Mexico like that.
Immediately called, so that one didn't work out. The other state that they were really looking to play with was Minnesota.
Oh yeah.
I don't think that one is very likely to work out, but you never know. I did see some reporting that the Trump campaign is very disturbed by some of the turnout numbers that they're seeing in the state of Minnesota, so I don't think that one is going to work out. But look, it doesn't have to. If they are able to hold what they did last time and take the real question mark becomes the state of Pennsylvania. If they're able to pull that one over, and if there was a big polling miss there, that is how Donald Trump ends up pulling off, once again, another insane victory. But I think we also have to say that there are we're talking about, you know, the erosion on the Biden side. There's tremendous missed opportunities here on the Trump side as well.
Yes.
Either one of these candidates tonight, had they run a different campaign, could be headed for a landslide victory.
It didn't have to be this close.
And Donald Trump in particular, being president of the United States, had a lot more tools at his disposal to turn this thing around and make it a significant win. Look, these numbers in Ohio, this should not be close. And right now, Biden is in position. He could actually win the state.
Yes.
I don't know enough about exactly where it's coming in, but the analysis that I'm reading online right now is Ohio is a true toss-up right now. And you think about not only the coronavirus, which is ravaging the industrial Midwest, you think about the economic missed opportunities in the industrial Midwest, where a lot of promises were made by by Donald Trump, and he ultimately didn't deliver. Not only in Youngstown, not only with the Lordstown GM plant, but also we covered Wisconsin, we covered Foxconn and how that turned out to be an actual con, 13,000 jobs promised, didn't deliver. And so then, and you're doing corporate tax cuts instead. Meanwhile, you've got Joe Biden, who I think has a little bit more of a halo in that region than maybe he does other places because of his association with the GM auto bailout. So look, I I think Donald Trump, if he had actually delivered for people in a significant way, the way that he ran on back in 2016, kept his eye on the ball, and actually came through for that region, he would be marching to re-election right now, no problem.
Yeah, so currently, just taking a look at the Arizona early vote numbers, because I want to start paying attention over to that side of the map. Right where it fell in was Democrats at 37%, Republicans at 37%, and then independents rolling in at 25%. Now, I'm not sure what the public polling was on the independent one, but I would be generally optimistic, just given what late breaks have been there for Trump, or been there for Biden, generally in that state. What's also interesting is I was taking a look here at the county by county in the state of Ohio, and I would be a little bit optimistic if I was Joe Biden. I mean, you have like Cuyahoga County, which is near the city of Cleveland, which is coming in like 74% for Biden and 25% for Trump. Same thing in the city of Toledo. Biden is winning at 72% of the vote. And then you can go and look at the city of Cincinnati, 70% for Biden. And so these are the areas in the counties where you're going to have that more suburban one. I mean, the city of Dayton is a little bit more interesting. Things are getting closer, 40% Trump, 60% for Biden. But by and large, then you have Columbus with Franklin County, 75% Joe Biden, 25% for Trump. And then the neighboring Delaware County at 52% Biden and 45% for Trump. So a little bit closer when we begin to look in there. But as we take a look, basically those little blue splashes there are the populated areas of the state. The rural ones are coming in for Trump hot. And also, we're always remember that those are the ones that report a little bit later, and they usually have like older infrastructure and all of that, so you never know how that's going to be coming in. But I think that again is just the snapshot of where the electorate is currently. With the suburban bet that the Biden campaign on, it has to deliver for them in one of these states. It has absolutely have to deliver. And the reason we're focusing on Ohio is because that's where we have the most amount of data.
Right.
But because it is I don't know how to say this. You can extrapolate it more. Extrapolable. I don't think that's a word. Into Pennsylvania and Michigan. Yeah, everybody on Twitter, you can use that. Also, #Rising. If you tweet #Rising, I'll shout some of you out on the show and begin to take a look at that to the many of you who are watching.
I have a comparison here for you from where the numbers are in Ohio right now versus how they went last time around with Hillary Clinton. So Mahoning County, it's a blue-collar area, industrial area. Hillary Clinton won this narrowly. This is Youngstown, okay? She won this very narrowly by 4,000 votes, 57,000 to 53,000. Right now, Joe Biden in Mahoning County is winning by a margin of 2-1. So huge pickup in one of those areas that saw a huge swing towards Donald Trump last time around. It wasn't ultimately in Obama-Trump County because Clinton narrowly pulled it off, but it was one of those areas that experienced a huge shift. This is not all of the votes are in, so caution. Maybe those are the early votes. Maybe the day of votes look a lot different and are a lot more favorable for Donald Trump. But that shows you why Joe Biden has a shot in the state of Ohio, whereas Hillary Clinton, this state was called.
It was like immediate.
It was instantly called because it was I think, what was it, a 9-point win for Donald Trump. This was not even close last time around. And so the fact that Joe Biden has made these kind of significant gains in the state of Ohio has got to be a very, very encouraging situation for him. And you also have to think about, again, if you're talking about missed opportunities for Donald Trump in the coronavirus pandemic, look, he could have done another stimulus.
Yes.
He could have pushed that. He could have worked. He could have gone in and, said, look, I'm going to take the Democrats' $2.2 trillion offer. We're going to get checks to everyone. We're going to make sure that you're kept whole during this crisis. I'm looking out for you. And that may have also turned the tide in this region where, the economy continues, of course, for everyone, always, every election, to be an incredibly significant and central issue. I did see some exit polls, though, coming out of the state of Ohio that said, what's the number one issue? Coronavirus.
There
no surprise. And they're experiencing massive outbreaks.
This is why I still am bullish on Biden's chances. And I see many of your rising hashtags, keep them coming, which is that whenever you're looking for Biden's chances, I've always thought it is tied to that fate of coronavirus.
Yeah.
And I can't put up the map right now, but we put it up so many times on the show. When we overlaid that hotspot in the last couple of weeks, all across the industrial Midwest. Hotspot, Wisconsin was a disaster. Michigan had some bleeding red in there. Then we had Ohio, which was getting hit as well. Now recall, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine was one of those Republican governors who took coronavirus seriously from the very beginning. And guess what? Had a very high approval rating. He was one of the highest Republican governor approval ratings in the entire country, straight away from Trump on several different occasions. And the interesting point there, again, is I'm really curious to see if, because the Sun Belt had its coronavirus spike, what was it, in April and May during the whole reopen the economy thing, that they might not punish Trump in the same way. That the economy, I mean, I saw some early exits out of Florida where people were saying the economy is my number one issue. Trump has always beaten or tied Biden. He's never once actually dipped below on the national level of handling of the economy. It's the virus which always killed him. So if those numbers across the industrial Midwest, which are very high on COVID, could ironically come and be Joe Biden's savior given right now.
You can look at the map. We've got it up there
have it right
on the 3-panel over there on the side, and throw it up on the screen. So, I mean, you can see where the hot spots are right now. And that industrial Midwestern region is bright red. Wisconsin, in particular, really heavily hit. Ohio also, seeing a major outbreak. I saw someone saying, I wish I could remember who, but, sometimes my brain is not that amazing.
I'm going to need some more coffee over
I saw someone saying that what typically happens when an incumbent president loses is they get swamped by events. So George H.W. Bush, the economy was tanking, right? You have, this time around, you've got coronavirus just overwhelming Donald Trump in terms of any type of messaging breaking through, because not only is he governed in a very different way than 2016, he's run this campaign this time around in a very different way than he did last time around. None of his messages really broke through. And that was one of the distinct differences, was he was so able to control the narrative, so able to focus people on the issues that he wanted to talk about, whether it was immigration, whether it was trade, whether it was corruption. This time around, first of all, I think they picked a very weak case to make. But second of all, they really tried here at the end. Their big October surprise was the freaking Hunter Biden laptop, which was a real story, a story that deserved to be covered as a real story.
As we did.
But ultimately, was not the thing that voters are first and foremost concerned about. They're worried about COVID. They're worried about the economy. They're worried about healthcare. They're not particularly worried about Hunter Biden's laptop. And so even if the Trump campaign had been able to control the narrative in the same way, it just didn't pack the punch of what they were saying back in 2016. But again, look, we're early. They have so far sort of done what they need to keep this thing in range, to give themselves a shot at it. But they've got to be concerned about some of these numbers coming out so far in the industrial Midwest.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, we're going to keep a close eye on these battleground states.
And here to talk about what we know so far is managing editor of Sabato's Crystal Ball, Kyle Condit. Great to see you again, Kyle. How's it going?
Good to see you, Kyle.
Thanks for having me. I got to admit, I find this to be a very confusing election night, because we're getting these results in, and it's like, you look at Pennsylvania and it's like blue as can be, but of course we know it's all the mail-ins. People have been texting me because I wrote a book on Ohio, and they said, "Oh my God, Ohio's going to vote for Biden," and it said, "Wait a second, this is the early vote. It's going to get more red." But it's just very interesting, because we're so used to the results now being very highly nationalized. And yet, obviously, Miami-Dade wasn't highly nationalized because Biden did horribly there.
Yes.
So it's just, I don't know. I think putting the pieces together are strange and difficult. Personally.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been trying to put together is exactly that. Is there a different dynamic playing out in the Sun Belt versus playing out with voters in the industrial Midwest? And one thing that we had picked up, Kyle, in the last New York Times Siena polling that had some industrial Midwest and some Sun Belt states, was that voters in those Sun Belt states rated Donald Trump much better on the economy than those actually in the industrial Midwestern states. And Joe Biden was actually doing better with white working class voters in the industrial Midwest than he was in the Sun Belt. Mm-hmm. So as I'm watching these results, and like you, I find it sort of confusing and try to make sense of it, I wonder if there's actually a little bit of a different trend playing out by region of country.
Yeah, and look, I think northern whites are likelier to vote Democratic than southern whites, and that's been true for the past several decades. And maybe we're seeing that sort of even get sharper tonight. Again, we also see that in some of those rural counties that Trump is doing as well, or maybe even better in some places across the country, but showing some clear erosion in some of the suburban, exurban places. But again, we're used to a kind of a predictable pattern on election night, sort of a rhythm of election night, and we knew going in it wasn't going to be like that. But even though we knew that, I think it's just been hard to interpret.
Yeah, it certainly is. So, Kyle, what are the metrics to watch for? We're now entering, it's the 9 p.m. hour. We're really going to start getting in a lot of data over the next hour or two. What are the things that everybody needs to be looking at? Is it Ohio with the vote that's going to start coming in after that early vote? Is it Pennsylvania? I mean, what are some things that we can extrapolate there as well? And then when Arizona and the rest of the country begins to close as well, the polls over there, what can we look at there?
I think if we could find some counties that are essentially 100% reporting, we could start comparing and contrasting them. But until a place is 100%, you can't just assume that the difference between 90% reporting and 100% reporting is going to be like minimal change. Like it could be a lot of change. So just watch for that. And like in North Carolina. If you look at some of those places, I think the numbers look great for Biden in certain areas, and these places are already matching their 2016 vote. But it also seems like the turnout's going to be a lot higher, and maybe that's going to. I think it's already allowed Donald Trump to catch up in a significant kind of way. I don't know what's going to happen in North Carolina, but certainly, if you look at Wake County where Raleigh is, if you look at Mecklenburg where Charlotte is. Those counties are really coming in for Biden, but then some of the rural places are pretty strong for Trump too.
Yeah.
Kyle, what are we seeing in the Senate races so far? While we're on North Carolina, let's actually dig into that one. The numbers I was looking at just a minute ago actually had, and this may be a little bit surprising, had Cal Cunningham underperforming Joe Biden by a little bit. This was one of the Democrats' top prospects to ultimately pick off incumbent Senator Republican Tom Tillis. Cunningham had a scandal here in the last couple of weeks, extramarital affair, texts that were published, those sorts of things. So look, he's ahead right now. But if he's undershooting where Biden is, and Biden has kind of a tough road here, this is looking fairly good so far for Tom Tillis.
Yeah, it could be. As I look at those vote counts on the screen there, it seems like both Cunningham's running behind Biden and Tillis is running behind Trump a little bit. I mean, that's not that surprising because I think these are basically both two weak candidates. Tillis has been unpopular for a long time, and Cunningham, of course, looked like a decent enough candidate. But then he had this extramarital affair that it seems like has hurt him some. But it looks like, I guess, if Biden falls short in North Carolina, it seems like Cunningham probably would too. And that could be the end of Democrats' hopes for the Senate. Unless they pull an upset somewhere else in the country. I guess maybe we look at the Iowa Senate race as a possibility. Last I checked, there was hardly anything in from Maine, I don't think. Colorado and Arizona, two other Democratic pickups are out west, so we don't know about them yet. But to me, the presidential race still seems up for grabs in the Senate as well.
Yeah, so that's interesting, Kyle. I mean, let's talk about North Carolina. Georgia, which is one we talked about. The New York Times, meter there seems particularly very bullish on Trump's chances. They're saying 81%. What do you think the reasoning behind that type of projection is? What are the numbers that you've seen in the state?
Well, look, I don't know how the Times does all that stuff,
right.
But I think that I think they put a lot of thought into it, and it must be just that they they're looking at the outstanding votes and they like it for Trump. But I got to say, there was a lot of pessimism about Trump in Georgia over the last week or two. But maybe that just wasn't the case. And again, in some of the rural places, it seems like Trump is really holding up pretty well. But we'll have to see what comes in from Metro Atlanta would be the key for Biden there. Again, this is not a must-win state for Biden, but it's one that if he did win it, it would probably be indicative of winning overall. Florida was that way too, but it certainly seems like Biden is going to come up short in Florida.
Yeah, certainly right.
So we haven't talked much about Texas because it sort of seems like, if Florida's off the table, then Texas has got to be off the table, right? But I mean, so far, Joe Biden is hanging in there with, according to what's in so far, with the narrow lead. What are you seeing in the Texas results right now?
It kind of looks a lot like the Senate race from 2018, where Beto O'Rourke did very well for a Democrat in Texas. Proved that that you compete in that state as a Democrat, but he ultimately fell about 2.5 points short of Ted Cruz. That's sort of how I'm looking at it right now. I know it seems like Biden is still ahead. But it's also, I think, a reminder that we talk about what happens with high turnout and who benefits from high turnout. The sort of conventional wisdom is that Democrats benefit from high turnout, but some of these places it might be that the Trump people are coming out of the woodwork and they're overwhelming the Democrats. In that sense, if Trump ends up winning, this will remind me of George W. Bush in 2004, when turnout really spiked from 2000. Democrats were really engaged to throw out an incumbent they didn't like, but the Republicans rallied and saved them. To me, that would be kind of the story if Trump ends up winning.
I think that certainly would be. So, I mean, Kyle, it's early in election night. What myths have already been disproven about this election now that we've gotten into it this far?
It wasn't a myth, but it was a worry for Democrats that I think was confirmed. They had a real problem in Miami-Dade County, and they had a real problem with some of the Latino voters there, particularly of Cuban descent. And also, I think that there was some thought that the president was going to be, really performing poorly and losing ground, like in all sorts of different kinds of places. And he has so far held up pretty well in some of these rural places. Now, there are suburban places that are swinging against him in big cities, and maybe that will ultimately cost him the election. But a lot of the really rural Republican places are holding up quite well.
Yeah. So, Kyle, the way this looks, it could very well come down to the state of Pennsylvania. What can we possibly say about the results that are in so far? What are the key places to watch? How are you looking at the results right there right now? And, do you have any insight into how the different campaigns kind of feel about what's going on the ground there?
I don't know. There was some reporting today that the Trump camp wasn't particularly happy with the on-the-ground turnout in Pennsylvania, but I really don't know. The results in Pennsylvania are wildly unrepresentative of reality, though. I mean, you've got Biden leading in places that Trump is going to win in landslide margins because of the partisan disparity in the mail-in vote. So we're just going to have to wait and see and get some election day results and try to get some completed counties to the extent that can happen, and see what those things tell us. But I don't have much of a feel at all for Pennsulvania, given the unrepresentativeness of the early results.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so challenging here is, look, you always have to be careful about reading the tea leaves in any of these states when you've only got, you got 12% reporting in Pennsylvania right now. But you even have to be beyond careful with that. Like in a state like Ohio, like you said, look, it's got like 65-70% of the vote in, but you still can't really say which way the state is going or if it's not going to end up in a wildly different place than it is right now. Are you seeing anything out of the exit polls that would indicate that voters in the industrial Midwest were looking at this election or focused on different issues than voters in other parts of the country? One thing that you can't help but note is that the biggest COVID outbreak right now is kind of centered right over some of those key industrial Midwestern states. I wonder if that's shifting or shaping the vote at all in and of itself.
I mean, it certainly could be. I think that political scientists are going to have a field day over the next year or two looking at COVID spikes and seeing whether that hasn't had any effect that they could try to prove on the election. And maybe if Biden holds up okay in the Midwest but does poorly in the Sun Belt, that would be maybe a part of how it played out. But again, I don't know if we're at the point where we could say that.
Yeah, well, really interesting analysis, Kyle. Thank you for joining us, man. We really appreciate it.
Yep, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So just to reset here for a moment what we know so far. The early states that we're kind of looking at, like, okay, if it's Florida and Georgia and North Carolina, and if one of these states goes, if Biden picks up any one of them, which a lot of analysts were predicting, this thing's basically over and done with, okay? not looking like the North Carolina's the best shot at this point, and it's not looking great that he's going to pick off any of those. Okay, so then you go out west. I mean, Texas, Biden still, maybe he ends up doing better in Texas than he does in Florida, which that's an interesting story in and of itself. But I think if you're not picking up Florida, if you're not picking up Georgia, North Carolina, it's probably unlikely that you're going to end up winning the state of Texas. Then you start looking at Arizona. We don't have any results there yet, so we have no idea what's going on in that state. But let's say Trump is able to hold on to the state of Arizona like he did last time around. He's able to win that state. Then you come down to these industrial Midwestern states. The timeline here really matters. Ohio is the only one, to my knowledge, of Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, where we're actually really going to know the vote count tonight.
Right.
I believe those other three all have to wait until Election Day to start counting their mail-in ballots. So unlikely that we get full results in any of those three tonight. So then you start to think about something we've talked about here in like the nightmare scenarios that we've floated, which is this possible red mirage situation.
Yes.
Where because the day of vote is more strongly Trump, and that's what gets counted first, it looks like he's on track to win. And then as the mail-in ballots come, it starts to slowly shift back to Joe Biden. We're not there yet in terms of
to be clear, none of these are even flashing red.
Right. In terms of like where things could be headed, though, that is a very realistic possibility that we could be facing down as this election ends up a lot closer than what a lot of analysts thought.
It could certainly be. I just think where we're headed right now is it's wonky. It's still 9:30, and I want to see that Arizona data coming because let's say things do overperform there. And here's another interesting point. This is from Nate Cohn. He's the guy who designed the needle, right? So he's explaining his needles on Twitter. And what he says is there are a few things that we should pause right now and think about, which is that his needles all use the same model. And so they kind of control for state vote patterns. So what he was saying is that the flood of results in Florida has kind of biased the results of their needles in North Carolina and Georgia.
Interesting.
And that the really interesting part is he's like, I don't think that Biden crushed it relative to our expectations in the most educated parts of Florida. He's like, we don't know if that's going to hold up in the Georgia suburbs. He possibly could. That's an example. That is very interesting to me. Why did the college-educated vote in Florida not come out for Biden in the expected margin? Because this community, I think, actually might be more national, so to speak, as in like we might be able to extrapolate more from their voting patterns in Florida to across the country because it's very possible there that, I mean, this is just, generally people who read the same news and same information diet and so much more. They don't necessarily, they might absolutely be swayed by different things. I want to be clear, there's diversity in every subgroup. But it's fascinating to see that if the college-educated swing is not what it is for Biden in Georgia, and how that might replicate itself across the country, because it's very possible that because of their overrepresentation in the Midwest, they could come in for Biden. It's very possible also he could win more of the white working class vote, or at least peel away some of Trump's appeal there and still pull out a win in the state. But I got to say, I mean, right now, that's the story to me, which is that their whole bet, I mean, the Lincoln Project, MSNBC, all these people, they went all in on these folks, and they didn't show up in the state of Florida. But Trump is on track. I want to say this again for maybe people who didn't hear it in the beginning of the show. On track to win the biggest victory in Florida, a bigger one than Obama in 2008, on the backs of Latino voters. And that is just something which I know Nicole Wallace is on MSNBC swigging some wine on behind the scenes, just being like, what the hell is this?
Look. All of the warning signs were there. All of the warning signs were there. How many times did we say they are taking a tremendous risk by running on like the lowest bar campaign message ever of like, I'm going to wear a mask and be nicer on Twitter. Okay. Now, this may still work out for them, right? They may narrowly pull this thing off. Donald Trump has made plenty of his own missteps. He could have been facing his own landslide at this point, especially given how resilient he's been with groups, even as he's made a lot of missteps and had a lot of problems. So the fact that it is this close in either direction was completely unnecessary, but it's what happens when you have two candidates who basically run on nothing. And that's ultimately what this election was. It was like a stylistic competition. This was the least policy-focused election, presidential election, certainly in my lifetime, maybe ever. How much do we talk about, like, their different plans and how they'll actually implement them and compare them and, like, what's this tax plan versus that one? Back Obama versus Romney, I mean, we could have recited chapter and verse exactly what their specific plans were. They were honed into in the debates. They were part of the campaign messaging.
Fight over the marginal tax rates and all that stuff. I mean, I remember.
Absolutely.
I was Benghazi, too. I mean, all of it.
Romney got on like a PowerPoint to talk about Social Security or whatever.
And Paul Ryan was over there in one of his oversized suits with his thing being like, here's a chart that goes that way. This is how much money we'll theoretically save.
Just think about what an incredible failure it is. We talked earlier about the Fox News polls where you had, 72% who said that they wanted government healthcare, run healthcare. 72%. Think of what an incredible missed opportunity you have here for either candidate to really go in on healthcare in the middle of a pandemic when you've had millions of people not only sickened and hundreds of thousands who have died, and you can only imagine how many are now facing medical bankruptcy because of their COVID treatment bills, but you've also had millions of people who have lost their employer-sponsored health insurance. And I listened closely to Biden's rhetoric on healthcare in particular, because this wasn't, it's an area, first of all, that I care a lot about. It's an area where Democrats overwhelmingly in the primary said they supported the Medicare for All position, but they backed Biden because he was electable. It was the one promise they made. They said, this guy is 100% going to beat Donald Trump. So I listened to Biden on healthcare, and over the course of this campaign, he walked away from the promises on the public option. He just stopped talking about it.
Yeah, he did.
It became just about, the public health plan, the wearing the mask, the following the scientists. But if you listen to his standard and the pre-existing conditions and the threat from Republicans, if you listen to his standard issue campaign stump speech, he didn't even talk about the public option anymore. It wasn't central to a lot of their messaging here down the stretch. And I just think when you looked at the polling across the country and you look at this generational divide between older voters who are, sort of more loyal partisans versus younger voters who are really looking at like the issues and things that they care about and wanted a candidate who was actually going to promise them something and try to deliver it for them, you just see what an incredible missed opportunity this was for Joe Biden to actually offer an affirmative, positive message that would inspire people to get out and vote beyond Donald Trump is bad.
And here's the thing. What's proving you right is that their strategy clearly did not deliver the landslide victory that certainly would have been possible. Trump, too. It never had to be this close. Shouldn't even be sitting here wondering about Ohio with 80% of the vote. It should just be like, done. They call it for Trump. And now it's a nail biter, and it probably will be all night, and that's something we're going to continue to keep you guys updated on. I think it's generally fascinating that we continue to look at these states, and we don't have enough data yet in order to extrapolate, but I think that policy does matter, and that's maybe the one thing I'm heartened by with this close result, even though I know it's more annoying and maybe it's going to take many days, is that there are millions of people out there who wanted more from their government, who didn't get anything, and are now having to vote on this crazy culture war stuff. So I love this. So one of our viewers, a classic Rising viewer, dressed up as a murdered stimulus check and just tweeted it at us. Andrew Hutchins, that's the best one. I'm shouting him out there. But, Andrew is getting onto something there, which is that those stimulus checks would have been one of the easiest ways to guarantee Trump's election. Why did it even need to be this close? And yet, we're beginning to look and analyze and see here is that it's essentially falling along cultural grounds. That's basically the state of play in Florida, which is that, yes, the economy was certainly there, but it was all socialism sucks that brought Miami-Dade County into the Trump camp. Now, if Trump pulls off a win in Georgia, I think it's largely going to be the same thing, and it's going to be a lack of inspiring enough message in order to blow out college-educated whites the way that they needed to. And it's going to be the same story in North Carolina. Carolina, which is that if Biden loses the state of North Carolina, that it's very likely if he loses that state, it's very likely that it's the exact same thing, which is that at the end of the day, a lot of traditional, more Republican, conservative voters voted to their conscience in terms of Amy Coney Barrett, in terms of what we see out there on the streets, and so much more. And we're like, look, I'm not saying the guy's perfect, but doesn't align with me. And I think that in that way, Biden somehow was just not able to offer enough up. Now, I don't want to write the man's obituary. I mean, these are all, again, just reasons why it's close.
Right.
What you and I are really interested in is, how did it get close? I mean, this is, first of all, already looking at a pretty massive polling miss in terms of a couple of different states.
Yep.
We're going to talk a lot about that one. I'm already beginning to reform the way I begin to think about this, especially Florida. And I think it's fascinating because I think a lot of the things we've talked about on the show from the very beginning, over a year and a half now that we've been doing it, is these theories mattered a lot. Chuck Rocha tweeted, my next book is going to be called I Told You So.
Which caught that
amazing.
As well.
We had him here from the very beginning, from when I took over. And you and I sat here, we began this show at the project that it is, and we were saying, Chuck, why is it these Latino voters are coming out for Bernie Sanders? This was like 7 months before. And he's like, I've got all the strategy, I've got this going on. They didn't listen to him. Not at all. It cost them the state of Florida, very much could cost them the state of Georgia, maybe North Carolina, and who the hell knows, in Texas.
Arizona as well.
New York Times
we don't have any results there.
Yeah, we don't have any results, so I don't want to speculate. But a New York Times reporter was saying that Texas is currently running around the same way that Cruz and Beto did. Well, guess what? That means Trump is probably going to win the state of Texas. Again, I actually don't have enough data in. Only 70 to 80% of the vote is in there, and it's a roughly tie right now between Biden and Trump, just for your perspective. But one of the reasons that Beto lost the state of Texas, again, nobody in the media will ever tell you this, is he didn't drive out a lot of Hispanic voters. His major bet was all in on those suburban whites around the city of Houston, around the city of Dallas, around El Paso and more, and it did not end up working for him. And so I think that overall that really is a story here, and it's going to be interesting to see how they have to grapple with it.
All right, so we want to check back in with our friend Dave Trotter, who's in the Sunshine State and tracking the data there extraordinarily closely. Dave, what are some of the trends that you see in the state of Florida that are, significant in the state, but also that we could extrapolate nationwide?
Well, I mean, I don't know how much it'll apply, but we had a large vote by mail and early vote. So election day wasn't as big, but it went strongly for Trump. For example, the last time I checked, there are actually more non-affiliated voters and minor party voters who voted on election day than actually registered Democrats. So that is a big shift. And actually in Sarasota County, I don't know if there was something wrong with their computers. At one point at around 5 or 6 p.m., Democrats only consisted of 16% of the election day votes. So what we're seeing are those margins I was telling you about before, how they were lower. They're starting to increase now because of the election day results.
Yeah.
So that might be something later on.
Certainly. So Dave, I mean, we've had a lot more data since the last time we talked. What are some new observations you can give us about the state of Florida?
Well, I think overall, if we looked at what Hillary would have gotten or what Hillary got and applied that to now in Miami-Dade, I don't think it would have made much of a difference now. It would have made it closer, but I think that we would still see Trump in the lead. So obviously it's very bad for the Democrats, but that trend, or I think that would be the same thing. If we look at Broward County, that I think is kind of the bigger story here because that's a few percentage points off, and that should be a county where Democrats are hitting 70%. That's not happening. But overall, we're just kind of seeing the small increases throughout the state. Now in states where Biden was overperforming, he's now underperforming, or counties, he's now underperforming Hillary. And there are some bright spots for the Democrats. Seminole County, it looks like Duval County, where Jacksonville is something that the Democrats will pick up. Pinellas,
what is the nature of those places, Dave? Like, are those like urban, suburban? What do the demographics look like? Do you see any sort of consistent trends there?
Well, I think let's start with Seminole. Seminole is a suburban area, but what's happened is Orlando has pushed out and become more Democratic. That has gone into Seminole County. So one thing that you've seen switch is Volusia County. And if you remember the 2000 election, that was one of the Democratic counties. A lot of those Republican voters have now pushed over to the river to St. John's River and now live there. That's why you see Volusia more Republican now. Pinellas County, yeah, you basically can say it's a suburban county, even though it has St. Petersburg in it. And when it comes to Duval, I would say Duval is still kind of a urban southern county. It still has that southern vibe to it.
Mm-hmm. And what I'm really interested in, Dave, is that, we can see and try to extract. I know you don't want to talk about other states as well, but we just talked about the suburban vote. What do we know about the black vote in the state of Florida? I know you talked about, which is one of the things that we should definitely caution ourselves here, is that there's a Caribbean black population, which is obviously different, just culturally and more. So what can you tell us about that?
I mean, right now, I don't know how much we can get from it until, like I said before, we get the precinct by precinct data to see what the turnout rates are. But as far as becoming, for example, sows at the polls, I think it is a big thing that obviously a lot of Democrats try to push, but it doesn't necessarily push the whole entire statewide vote. It helps. We need to get those out if you're a Democrat. But yeah, I don't think that the engagement with the black community is there necessarily as the Republicans have made inroads with the Hispanic community.
Yeah, certainly.
Hey, Dave, it's been so great having you tonight. Thank you so much for breaking it all down. Really invaluable.
Great. Thank you very much.
Dave, before you go, where can everybody go and follow you? I want this man to get more Twitter followers.
Okay, yeah. So it's the DA Numbers Guy on Twitter. So yeah, that's my handle there. And the Florida Squeeze is our blog that we do. So yeah, join us there as well.
Yeah, absolutely invaluable. Thank you, Dave. Great to see you.
Thanks, Dave.
Great. Thank you.
All right, next up is our all-star panel. First is the Trump v. Biden drama, how it's dominated much of the news, and a change in the congressional balance of power, how that could map out either candidate's presidency. So we've got the Hills correspondent Reed Wilson on the Senate races.
There are 35 U.S. Senate seats up for election this year, and they fall broadly into about 3 buckets here. The first bucket is the seats that Republicans might actually pick up. Alabama Senator Doug Jones faces a really tough path to re-election. The second seat Republicans might pick up is in Michigan, where John James, a young second-time candidate, is running against Senator Gary Peters. The second bucket is the Republican incumbents who are in really deep trouble, places where Democrats are likely to win. And those are really 5 states here. First of all, Senator Susan Collins in Maine faces a really tough re-election fight against State House Speaker Sarah Gideon. In Colorado, Senator Cory Gardner faces a difficult path against former Governor John Hickenlooper. In Arizona, Senator Martha McSally faces a difficult fight against Mark Kelly, a retired astronaut and the husband of the former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. In North Carolina, Senator Tom Tillis faces a former state senator named Cal Cunningham. And then in Iowa, Senator Joni Ernst faces a businesswoman making her second run for public office, her first run as a Democratic nominee. The third bucket we'll call the Democratic reach seats, the seats where Republican incumbents are safer, but they still face pretty significant challenges from their Democratic rivals. Georgia has 2 seats up for election this year, including 1 special election. Then you go north to South Carolina, where Senator Lindsey Graham faces a surprisingly spirited challenge from a Democrat named Jamie Harrison. Harrison has raised more money than any Senate candidate in the history of running for the United States Senate. It's just an amazing haul that shows you the power of small dollar donors these days.
One more significant call, actually 2 more that we can make here according to the AP. First of all, Madison Cawthorn, who we've had on this show, has attracted a lot of attention, featured at the RNC, made some various controversial moves, but he will be the first member of Congress born in the 90s. That's a North Carolina seat. That was Mark Meadows' former seat, and was actually a surprisingly tight race. It was one that Republicans originally expected for Cawthorn to win overwhelmingly. He has ultimately won that seat, so he will be a member of Congress. Also, Colorado has now been called for Joe Biden, called pretty quickly. And that is one, look, it's not a big surprise. And it's a state that is really emblematic of this realignment towards the Democratic Party. I mean, Colorado was a true swing state not very long ago. This one is, kind of like Virginia, which with a suburban college-educated vote has really trended blue. So not a surprise, but one more example of that realignment that has occurred. It's such a big night in terms of calls for our brain trust, and we have a phenomenal panel that we want to bring to you this evening to break down all of the results that we have. Let me just start, though, before I bring them in, by resetting what we know so far. So none of the really key swing states have been called yet, okay? So we still don't have an AP call in Florida, although that one looks very much like it is going for Donald Trump. We still don't have an AP call, and we're going by the AP in Georgia, though that one also looking pretty good right now for Donald Trump. We don't yet have an AP call in North Carolina. That state also looking pretty good right now for Donald Trump. Keep in mind, those are all three states that Donald Trump absolutely must win if he is going to win the presidency. Right now, he is on track to be able to hold on to those states, and that puts him in play. Now we're looking at kind of a toss-up scenario. We've got results that are coming in Pennsylvania, and we've got results that are coming in Ohio that look fairly good for Democrats. It looks early on like perhaps the industrial Midwest is going a little bit of a